The dimly lit supply room was cramped and smelled of dust and mold. Old crates lined the walls, their lids warped from years of neglect. Inside, there were scraps of fabric, discarded blankets, and, if they were lucky, dried rations. A pet near the corner sniffled, clutching a strip of cloth to her chest. "We're going to die for this, aren't we?" she whispered. Maria crouched down beside her eyes fierce. "We're going to die if we don't do this. It's not a choice anymore." The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling over them like a shroud. Maria straightened, her voice firm as she addressed them all. "They've taken everything from us. Our dignity, our freedom, our names. It's time we take something back." One by one, the pets nodded. The fear remained, but beneath it was a flicker of determination. They worked quickly, stuffing whatever they could find into stolen satchels. A few stale loaves of bread, half a sack of grain, even some frayed rope, all of it could mean the difference between survival and death. Maria kept watch as the others moved silently, her mind racing. The success of their plan hinged on every second they could buy. If the vampires discovered their efforts too soon, none of them would live to see the morning. As they left the supply room, Maria cast one last glance over her shoulder, her heart pounding. If they were caught, there would be no mercy. Michael's feet dragged as he ascended the stone staircase leading to the female vampire's chambers. His stomach churned with a mix of fear and self-loathing. The door loomed ahead, black and imposing, with intricate carvings that seemed to writhe under the flickering torchlight. He hesitated for a moment, then knocked. "Enter," came the cold, clipped voice from within. He stepped inside, bowing his head instinctively. The room was sparsely furnished, save for a massive iron chair in the center, its edges sharp and cruel. The female vampire sat there, her pale fingers drumming against the armrest. "Report," she said, her crimson eyes narrowing as they fixed on him. Michael swallowed hard. I've heard whispers, my lady. A group of slaves is planning an escape." Her eyes gleamed with interest, but her expression remained cold. "Continue." "They're planning to raid the armory," Michael said, forcing his voice to remain steady. "They believe they can arm themselves and fight their way out through the front gates." The vampire leaned forward, her gaze piercing. "And you're certain of this?" "Yes, my lady," Michael lied, his palms slick with sweat. For a moment she said nothing, her eyes searching his face as if peeling back the layers of his mind. Then, with a dismissive wave of her hand, she leaned back. "Fools, let them try. It will be their last mistake." Michael nodded, bowing low. "Of course, my lady." As he turned to leave, her voice stopped him cold. "Michael!" He froze. "Yes, my lady. Don't disappoint me." The threat hung heavy in the air as he exited the room, his heart pounding like a war drum. Back in the slave quarters, the atmosphere was grim. Luke and Jake had assembled the others, explaining the plan in hushed tones. "You want us to what?" a young slave asked, his voice shaking. Luke stepped forward, his face impassive. "We need blood bags to lure the ferals. The vampires can't know we've taken from their supply, so it has to come from us." Murmurs rippled through the group, a mix of disbelief and fear. Jake's voice cut through the noise. "You've all seen what they do to us, to the pets. Are you really going to sit here and wait for your turn to die?" The room fell silent. One by one, the slaves stepped forward, baring their arms as Luke and Jake prepared crude syringes made from scavenged supplies. The process was slow and excruciating. Blood dripped into the bags, each drop a testament to their desperation. The slaves grew paler with each donation, their bodies trembling with weakness. Jake clenched his fists, his jaw tight as he watched. "We're going to make this worth it," he muttered under his breath. The blood bags were heavy in Jake's arms as he made his way through the mansion's labyrinthine hallways. His steps were deliberate, his expression neutral, but his heart raced with every passing guard. Jake had to be fast before the blood coagulated too much within the bags. "Delivery for the quarters," he said when questioned, keeping his voice steady. The guards barely glanced at him, their disinterest a small blessing. When he reached the vampire's quarters, the air was thick with the oppressive scent of decay and power. Jake set the bags down carefully, making sure to place them out of sight but in strategic locations where the scent would linger. Behind a thick velvet curtain, under the edge of a plush chaise lounge, and near the foot of an ornate, towering bed, each spot was chosen with care, designed to delay discovery until the scent of blood was undeniable. Using a small, concealed knife, he punctured each bag just enough for the blood to seep out slowly. The rich, coppery scent filled the air almost immediately, mixing with the room's faint traces of perfume and decay. He wiped his hands on his trousers, his heart hammering in his chest as he surveyed his work. As he turned to leave, he caught sight of a guard lingering nearby, his eyes narrowing slightly. Jake forced himself to walk away calmly, resisting the urge to run. Only when he was back in the relative safety of the slave quarters did he allow himself to breathe. "We're one step closer," he said to Luke, his voice low but resolute. Luke nodded, his expression grim. "One step closer to freedom or death." Luke adjusted the heavy iron keyring on his belt, his heart hammering against his ribcage like a trapped animal. Each step toward the feral prison felt heavier than the last, as if the mansion itself were weighing down on him, testing his resolve. The corridors leading to the prison were quieter than usual, the dim torches casting flickering shadows across the cold stone walls. He glanced at the blood bags slung over his shoulder, their dark contents shifting with each movement. The shadows of the mansion seemed heavier that night, stretching like the claws of unseen predators. Every breath Luke took felt like inhaling ice. He stood at the entrance to the feral prison, facing a hulking vampire guard whose sharp eyes bore into him with suspicion. "You're alone?" the guard asked, narrowing his bloodshot gaze. His voice was like gravel, low and menacing. Luke forced his body to stay still. "Yes, I was told to feed them. There wasn't time to wait for a second hand." The guard tilted his head slightly, frowning. "Strange. That's against protocol." "I didn't question it," Luke replied, keeping his tone neutral. "I only follow orders. If there's an issue, you can take it up with Lord Malric." He emphasized the name, knowing it carried enough weight to dissuade further questioning. The guard hesitated, his hand gripping the heavy iron key ring at his belt. Finally, he grunted and turned, unlocking the thick iron door. "If you don't come out, I'm not going in there to save you." Luke swallowed the knot in his throat and stepped through the creaking door. The air inside was suffocating, a cocktail of rot, blood, and despair that clung to his skin. The dim torches lining the narrow corridor flickered, casting grotesque shadows on the blood-smeared walls. Ahead, the ferals stirred. As Luke walked deeper into the prison, the sounds of chains rattling and low guttural growls filled the space. His eyes adjusted to the dim light, revealing the caged horrors that lined both sides of the corridor. The ferals were skeletal, their flesh clinging to their bones as if their bodies had forgotten the luxury of sustenance. Their jagged teeth glistened, stained with dried blood. Their red eyes glowed like embers, following Luke's every move. One of them lunged against the bars, snarling viciously. The force of its attack sent sparks flying as its chains strained. Luke froze for a moment, his heart hammering in his chest. "Easy," he muttered to himself, his voice barely audible over the cacophony of hunger and rage. He reached into the sack he carried, pulling out blood bags. One by one, he hurled them to the farthest end of the corridor. The ferals reacted instantly, their attention shifting to the scent of fresh blood. They clawed at the bars, their inhuman screeches echoing through the halls. Luke's hands trembled as he punctured the bags with a sharp nail. Blood sprayed across the stone floor, pooling and trailing toward the cages. The ferals went wild, thrashing against their confines. "Just a little longer," Luke whispered, his voice a plea as much as a reassurance, unlocking the beast. With the ferals distracted, Luke moved to the first cell. He fumbled with the iron key, his fingers slick with sweat. The lock clicked open with a groan, and the feral inside lunged, its chains barely holding it back. Luke recoiled, his stomach churning. He moved to the next cell, then the next, each lock opening with agonizing slowness. By the time he reached the final cell, a sound behind him froze him in place, the snap of breaking metal. Luke turned, his blood running cold. At the far end of the corridor, one of the ferals had broken free of its shackles. Its red eyes met his, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. Then it roared, a guttural sound that shook the air. Luke didn't think. He ran. The feral gave chase, its bare feet slapping against the blood-soaked floor. Luke's legs burned as he sprinted toward the exit, the beast's growls growing louder behind him. As he reached the door, he shouted to the guards stationed outside. "One of them's loose!" The guard's eyes widened. Without hesitation, he slammed the door shut and locked it, sealing Luke on the safe side. "Stay here!" the guard barked, running off to alert reinforcements. Luke doubled over, panting. His body trembled with a mix of fear and exhilaration. Then Luke carefully unlocked the gate and ran sprinting for the others. Waiting for the ferals to leave the prison to hunt for the human blood lingering in the air. Elias crept through the mansion's east wing, his heart pounding in his ears. The oil-soaked rags he carried reeked, but their stench was nothing compared to the fear gnawing at him. He paused by a towering set of curtains, their deep crimson fabric heavy with dust. Carefully he tucked an oil-soaked rag into the folds and doused the surrounding area. The hall was eerily silent, save for the faint crackle of nearby torches. Every creak of the floorboards felt like a thunderclap in the oppressive quiet. He moved to a series of ornate paintings lining the walls. Their gilded frames depicted long-dead vampires in regal poses. Elias doused the edges of the canvas with oil, his hands shaking. Finally he pulled out the lighter. The small flame flickered, illuminating his face. He hesitated, his thumb hovering over the spark wheel. "This is for all of us," he whispered. He lit the first rag. The flame caught slowly, then roared to life, licking up the curtain. Elias moved quickly, lighting more rags and tossing them onto the oil-soaked floor. The fire spread rapidly, devouring everything in its path. Smoke filled the air, stinging his eyes and lungs. As the flames climbed higher, alarms began to sound, deep, resonant gongs that echoed through the mansion. Luke, Jake, and Elias regrouped near the pets' quarters, their faces streaked with sweat and soot. The chaos inside the mansion was palpable, the sound of shouted orders, the clash of weapons, and the distant roars of ferals echoed through the halls. "Now," Luke said, his voice firm. They made their way to the pets' chambers, where a handful of guards were stationed. "There's a fire!" Luke shouted, his voice tinged with urgency. "You need to get help." The guards exchanged glances, their confusion giving way to panic. They bolted toward the source of the commotion, leaving the chambers unguarded. Luke and Jake burst into the room, where the pets huddled together, their faces pale with fear. "It's time," Luke said. "Follow us. Stay quiet, and don't look back." The pets hesitated for a moment, then rose as one, their determination outweighing their fear. The group moved quickly, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. The smell of smoke grew stronger, mingling with the scent of blood that seemed to permeate the very walls. As they reached the edge of the east wing, Luke glanced back. The flames had spread, casting an ominous glow that lit up the night. "This is it," he said, his voice steady. No turning back. Luke's thoughts churned with doubt as they gathered in the dimly lit chamber near the entrance to the feral prison. The air was thick with the scent of blood, smoke, and Farah's suffocating reminder of what they had done. He clutched the bundle of supplies tightly, his knuckles pale. The prison was so close but now felt like an eternity away. Have we rushed this? The question gnawed at him, echoing in his mind as he glanced at the others. Jake was sharpening one of the makeshift wooden spikes, his jaw clenched in grim determination. Elias adjusted the strap on a bundle of blankets, his gaze darting nervously toward the flickering light of the fire spreading above them. The pets and other slaves huddled close, their faces pale, their eyes wide with fear and hope. They were running on borrowed time and worse on sheer luck. The key in his possession had been their catalyst, but now he wondered if it had made them reckless. Could they really outrun the chaos they had unleashed? Only time would tell. They slipped into formation, the pets and slaves forming a tight group between Luke, Jake, Elias, and a handful of others armed with crude wooden spikes. Each step felt like it could be their last, the world above them a chaotic maelstrom of death and fire. The growls of ferals mixed with the metallic clang of swords and the wet, sickening sound of claws tearing into flesh. Luke stole a glance down a corridor as they moved. A feral lunged toward a group of vampires, its claws ripping through the chest of a lower-ranking guard with ease. The vampire screamed, a sound unlike anything Luke had heard before, as the feral tore through sinew and bone, blood spraying across the stone walls like a grotesque mural. Another vampire tried to intervene, his rapier slicing cleanly through the feral's arm, but it was too late. The beast turned, its jagged teeth sinking into the vampire's neck, ripping out his throat in one brutal motion. The feral dropped him like a rag doll, its glowing red eyes fixating on its next victim. Nearby, another feral dragged a vampire to the ground, its claws shredding through the fine fabric of the vampire's coat, exposing pale flesh. The vampire shrieked as the feral dug its teeth into his stomach, pulling out entrails in a horrific display. Luke pulled his gaze away, his stomach churning. He couldn't afford to freeze now. "Keep moving," he hissed, his voice barely above a whisper. They moved as shadows, staying low, slipping through the carnage unnoticed. Lady Alara Nightvale, her silver hair stained with blood, extended her hands toward a feral. Shadowy tendrils erupted from her fingers, wrapping around the beast and squeezing until it burst apart, a spray of blood and viscera painting the walls. The fire Elias had started was spreading rapidly. Flames climbed the walls, devouring tapestries and wooden beams. Smoke billowed through the corridors, choking the air. The vampires, preoccupied with the ferals, paid little attention to the blaze consuming their home. Just the diversion we need, Luke thought grimly. The corridor narrowed as they moved deeper, the walls slick with condensation and the faint, cloying scent of rot. The group came to the final stretch of the prison, a row of cells stretching into the shadows. Then they heard it. A low growl echoed from the farthest cell. It wasn't loud, but it carried weight, a guttural, inhuman sound that made the hair on Luke's arm stand on end. Everyone froze. From the open cell at the end of the corridor, movement stirred. A feral, bound in heavy chains, lay slumped against the wall. But then its head jerked up, and its bloodshot eyes locked onto the group. Humans! The scent of human blood filled the air. The feral's growl deepened, turning into a wet snarl. It threw itself against the chains, its body contorting in unnatural ways. "Keep moving," Luke whispered, his voice barely audible. The feral's frenzy intensified. Pieces of its body tore free, hanging in bloody ribbons as it writhed and clawed at the air. "Gods!" Elias whispered, his voice trembling. "Shut up," Jake hissed. The feral's chains groaned, its flesh tearing further with each lunge. The air was thick with the coppery tang of blood and the fetid stench of decay. Then silence. The feral froze, its eyes still fixed on them. Its breathing was ragged, each exhale a guttural rasp. Jake turned, gesturing for everyone to stay silent as they moved past the cell. Each step was agonizingly slow, the sound of their boots on stone impossibly loud in the stillness. They were almost past it. A sudden crash shattered the silence. The feral hurled itself against the bars, its body ripping free of its chains with a sickening crunch. Flesh and bone splattered across the stone. It stared at them, unhinged and ravenous. The pets gasped, their terror breaking the fragile quiet. "Run!" Luke shouted. The group bolted, the sound of the feral's snarls chasing them as they fled. The feral erupted from the shadows, its gaunt form blocking the path ahead. It sniffed the air, its sunken nostrils flaring. Then, with a low, guttural growl, it surged forward. One of the pets screamed, her grip faltering. The feral was on her before she could even cry out. Its jaws unhinged wider than seemed possible, and it sank its teeth deep into her neck. Blood sprayed in an arc, coating the feral's face as it ripped her throat out. Her lifeless eyes stared blankly at the ceiling, but the feral didn't stop. It tore her stomach open, spilling her intestines onto the floor. Luke's voice cut through the horror. "Run!" The group bolted, the sound of the feral's snarls chasing them as they fled. Luke's heart thundered in his chest. He pushed one of the pets forward. "Don't stop! Keep running!" Elias stumbled, his foot catching on uneven stone. He hit the ground hard. Luke skittered to a halt, grabbing Elias and hauling him upright. "Move!" The feral's shadow loomed on the wall behind them. They burst into a wider chamber. Jake spun around, holding his spike like a spear. "We make a stand here!" "No!" Luke hissed. "We don't stand a chance." But the group staggering to a stop behind them. The feral was still feeding, crouched over the broken body of one of the pets. It ripped her leg clean from her body with a sickening crack. The pet's body convulsed once, then fell limp. Luke took a step forward, his voice sharp. "Pikes up! Hold your ground! Don't break formation or we all die!" The feral charged. It moved with terrifying speed, a blur of rotting flesh and bone. "Brace!" Luke shouted. The moment stretched into eternity. The feral collided with the group. Elias's pike pierced its chest. "Now!" Luke roared. The group surged forward, stabbing into the feral's body, flesh tearing and bones crunching. Jake struck the killing blow, driving his spike deep into the feral's neck. It let out a final guttural growl. Slowly, its remaining eye began to dim. Luke dropped his spike, his hands trembling. "It's dead," he muttered. "It's finally dead." The survivors stared at the corpse. It lay in a mangled heap, one remaining eye staring blankly into the void. Jake spat on the corpse. Let's hope that was the last one. The group huddled around a fallen slave, his blood pooling beneath him. Elias knelt beside the man. "We can save him," Elias whispered. Luke stood back, his expression cold. "He's already gone." Luke knelt beside the dying man. "What's your name?" The man hesitated. "Ryan." Luke nodded. "Ryan, you're free. No more numbers, no more chains. I swear I'll remember you." Luke pulled a wooden spike from his belt. "I'll make it quick." He plunged the spike into Ryan's chest. Ryan's body jolted once, then stilled, his features frozen in a serene finality. The silence that followed was deafening. "This is what it takes to survive," Luke said, his voice like steel. "Every step we take, we lose more of us. But we're still here. Don't let their deaths be in vain." The tunnel narrowed into a winding path. The only sounds were the shuffle of footsteps. They passed corridor after corridor of empty cells. The stench of decay was suffocating. One of the pets gagged. Luke's sharp whisper cut through the silence. "Keep moving." The group emerged from the cavern into a large open space. The stars stretched endlessly above them. The air was crisp and cool. For the first time, hope flickered in their hearts. But as they moved toward the mouth of the cave, a figure stepped forward. Lord Malric stood before them, his sword dripping with fresh gore. A wicked smile spread across his face. "So, my little prodigy made it out alive," he said, his voice a mockery of praise. "And with slaves and pets in tow. You've exceeded my expectations, Luke." Luke's grip tightened on his spike. Malric tilted his head. "Do you remember what I told you? A toll is owed. And now I've come to collect." Luke stepped forward. "If you want a toll, Malric, you'll have to take it from me." Malric's smile widened. "Oh, I fully intend to." The chamber was deathly silent. Malric raised his gloved hand and pointed. "That one. Behind you." Luke's breath hitched as he turned. "Michael." Michael stood frozen, his face drained of all color. Michael had sold out his own kind. But now, faced with the same fate himself, he was nothing but a sniveling wreck. "No, please," Michael rasped. "I did everything you asked." Malric crouched beside him. His voice dropped to a whisper. "And yet, here we are." Michael let out a choked whimper. Malric reached for him. And that was when Luke moved. A primal scream tore from his throat as he lunged for Malric's heart. Time slowed. Then, in the space between heartbeats, Malric vanished. A split second later, a force like a battering ram struck Luke's chest. His ribs shattered. Pain, blinding, soul-ripping pain. Luke was airborne before he was hurled backward like a rag doll, his back slammed into solid stone. Sickening cracks split through the chamber. His body crumpled to the floor. Every nerve screamed. He couldn't move. Through the ringing in his ears, he heard Malric's bored voice. Predictable. Luke forced his head up just in time to see Jake. Jake was shaking, his teeth bared. Malric turned toward him. "I wouldn't. Attack me and you die." Jake hesitated. Malric smiled. Luke tried to push himself up, but pain exploded through his ribs. A shadow loomed over him. Then, agony. Malric's boot crushed his hand against the stone floor. Luke's scream ripped through the chamber. The sound was raw, guttural, something torn from the depths of his soul. His fingers bent at unnatural angles, bones splintering beneath the unrelenting pressure. Malric crouched down, his fingers gripping Luke's chin. "You're brave," the vampire murmured. "But bravery without power, that's just suicide." Michael was sobbing, his entire body convulsing. Malric released Luke and turned toward the cowering traitor. "Please," Michael begged. Malric tilted his head. Begging. How human. Michael's lips parted. Then darkness swallowed him whole. The shadows surged forward, wrapping around his throat. Michael let out a gurgling scream as he was dragged into the black void. His nails tore off in bloody streaks. Then he was gone. Luke barely registered the hands grabbing him, dragging him away from the wreckage. His vision blurred. Malric stood tall, untouched. Like none of this had even mattered. Luke wanted to stand, wanted to fight. But the pain was too much. It dragged him under, into a void of nothingness. And then, darkness. Hello all, this is Mr. X Wiggles. I hope you have enjoyed my story. I know it was slow at parts, and it originally wasn't written for formats like this, so I had to adapt it slightly. I will be doing this more often, with using stories from No Sleep or creepypasta.com, and creating my own. I will merge all the parts together and create a long video in the future. Stay tuned for more creepy stories, for those late nights and times where interesting story fills the silence. For now, goodbye.